nation's power.
Whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, a Libertarian, an Independent, a Green, whatever you are, politically, the right to have discourse within the public square is fundamental to being whatever you are and whoever you are within this democratic republic. That's what's under attack right now. When you think of personal privacy, as we used to think about the doorway of our home that was protected from intrusion, right? That no one could kick in your door and occupy your residence and confiscate your goods without due process and the understanding of law. But your digital doorway, that is more fundamental to your freedom and your liberty and your privacy today than anything ever imagined, and would have been protected had it been imagined 250 years ago, absolutely protected, and it's not. This Mother's Day is coming up this weekend, Mother's Day. I want to shout out for all the moms out there, my own and my fiancée, Ann, who's recovering after a surgery this week, and all the mothers out there who brought us all into the world so we can do the work that we do. And we just want to make sure we show our appreciation. Make sure you do that this weekend if you haven't done so already. Thinking about all of the fundamental issues that are at stake right now, and when I started reporting on a lot of these issues, technology issues, the technocracy, as it's now referred to in terms of what government has become, the blending. And if you look at the Democratic Party, what does it consist of now? And, multi-generational history. My brother Tom did his master's thesis on that, and one of his things he was doing in college. And it was the idea that over generations from one to the next is where you really get a historical context that otherwise is lost by whoever sort of trains up the next generation. If you can do this successively 2, 3, 4 generations, as this happened now, you can really reshape and reframe what becomes history. What is the future? When you think about the internet and modern media, the technocracy's tools, these have the greatest impact of all in changing the very character and nature of not just public debate, the town square, if you will, but let's think about it in the context of our founding fathers even, and what's kind of happened and what's driven it. And a lot of it is, in fact, the military-industrial complex, which later merged with the academics, and then the globalists to create something much, much different, but predicated on the same warnings that Thomas Paine, one of our founding fathers in terms of debate, when he wrote Common Sense and the Rights of Man, and I've been reviewing those writings lately. And one of the things he warned about was standing militaries being formed up after and in advance of war. That's when they collected tax. We didn't have standing income taxes, and we didn't have standing armies. So they would, governments would have these conflicts. They would create taxation and then an army to go deal with the problems. And after the army was done doing its thing, they never reduced the taxes. They just added to them periodically with a new war. And if you look at sort of the evolution of our country, not inside of a monarchy, but in sort of a technocracy that we've created today, you have the same equation. Think about the largest portion of the deficits are driven by defense spending, most of which is for foreign governments and foreign institutions that have nothing absolutely to do with you and I on a day-to-day basis. But our deficits are paying for that. Our billions and billions and trillions of dollars, now trillions in deficits, are paying for all of that. At the same time, we deindustrialize the West and then suppress the ability to have this discussion. And that's really what's going on. It's an attack on the First Amendment and the Second Amendment, the foundations of the Republic, when you get right down to it, on the same arguments, the same debate, the same fundamental human qualities that were being debated 250, 275 years ago, when the founding fathers were emerging in their thought processes in terms of what a democracy within a republic might look like and how that might evolve. And we've been in that experiment now over 250 years. And there's been changes, we've had constitutional amendments that came after those first 10 Bill of Rights. But when you think about this, again, within the technocracy that exists today, ground has to be recaptured. This president is the only one. The Democrats are making it institutionally acceptable to attack gun rights and speech rights and press rights and the right of assembly, even when you consider the internet is the town square. It's where we assemble in the 21st century to have a dialogue. And anything that restricts that dialogue is an affront to a constitutional form of government such as ours that has embedded in it freedom of the press, which isn't just about the press getting to restrict and control. It's not a business amendment. It's not a business transaction. The press is a principle, an idea, an ideal that's embedded in who we are, whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, a Libertarian, an Independent, a Green, whatever you are. Politically, the right to have discourse within the public square is fundamental to being whatever you are and whoever you are within this democratic republic. That's what's under attack right now. When you think of personal privacy, as we used to think about the doorway of our home that was protected from intrusion, right? That no one could kick in your door and occupy your residence and confiscate your goods without due process and the understanding of law. But your digital doorway, that is more fundamental to your freedom and your liberty and your privacy today than anything ever imagined, and would have been protected had it been imagined 250 years ago, absolutely protected, and it's not. We've allowed businesses to exploit it for commercial purposes in partnership with government who exploits it for other purposes, and then they use the vehicles of government under the Obama administration to further their political ends. No, the vehicle of government is not to further anyone's individual or collective political ends in that sense, without it being fully transparent and exposed to public debate, public discourse, open channels of communication, and absolute free speech. Absolute free speech, no restriction, except you have the individual right to change the channel. That's it. In terms of weapons of war, nonsense. Kick that back into their league and get a bumper sticker or T-shirt together without cannons and the merchant marines, right? I mean, if we hadn't had independently owned cannons and mortars, no Revolutionary War would have been won. And we wouldn't have been able to deal with the attacks of our shipping on the open seas. In fact, it was Paine who proposed issuing special grants to privateers, private ship owners, where for every pound of cannonballs and gunpowder and cannons that they had to lose freight, that we compensated them for the loss of freight, but we equipped them with some cannons. That would have been a pretty good expenditure of public money, merchant ships that we didn't have to pay for, fully equipped with cannons. Pretty good idea. Got a lot of ships in the sea in a hurry that were already there. We just said, hey, guys, add some more cannons. And today we're worrying about assault rifles for a few lunatics. And when you think about gun deaths in the United States, in my community in Alaska, it's not gun deaths, people getting run over by cars. I think they're out beating gun deaths this year in Anchorage. But gun deaths, yeah, they're legitimate, big deal. 15, 20,000 a year, that's a big number. Medical malpractice, about 250,000 people die of that a year. No one's confiscating scalpels and pills from doctors right now. But they're over 10 times, 12 times, 15 times gunshot deaths, and there's nothing going on there, except your medical bills are going up. Speech, freedom of speech, under attack when we think about what's happened to this network and now others, that's quickly devolving. But I want to go back in time again, because the multi-generational history is a big deal. And, I'm 60 now, and when I think back to the conversation I had with my grandfather, who was born in 1890, all right? So that goes back a ways. You get a perspective of the evolution of technology. when you get to have a conversation with a guy like that. Now he's of course long since passed, but thinking, multi-generational memory and how we look at our politics. We have now over 250 years of history from the founding fathers to where we are today. And 2.5 centuries plus, you lose a lot in the translation over time. And that's some of what I think this program has been about, is trying to recapture some of that in the onslaught of a globalist assault that happens, as the late Chuck Carter used to say, for those that remember him as a radio host, one slice at a time until the bologna is all gone, right? I mean, it's like the slow boil of the frog. And so the multi-generational perspective is important. And young people now, invigorated with that knowledge, can be a real force for change. And so, part of the, is the analysis of the current events against the backdrop of history and the remembrance of the basic values that drive the country, I think, again, is foundational. And yeah, they were a bunch of old white-haired white dudes back then. And we've evolved as a country in terms of our understanding of humanity and freedom and liberty. And we've continued that evolution. And yeah, things do change, and history does change things. And so we need to make sure we've retained the fundamentals of those basic rights on the backdrop, on the scaffolding of modern culture, on the things that create the modern culture, because the foundation still remains the same. But we've continued to build on that foundation, and we cannot lose sight of the foundation that holds the whole thing together, and that's what's been lost. This generation particularly, although they say the generation coming behind this current one is one of the most conservative ever, and I think so, because it's the backlash to the craziness that people are seeing today and how that's really rubbed against the base of humanity. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom, privacy is a fundamental, were experiments 250 years ago, and they proved to be quite useful. What has happened is a drift away from the experiment that was working, in fact, past the experiment to success, and now it's evolving again. And let me remind people how what was handled in a monarchy. That's what I want to go back to, because that's what was being resisted back then. And it was the idea that everybody was on the land, but the land was owned by the monarchy, and they took your productive production, a certain percentage of production from the land. And if you didn't produce enough, they just throw you off in the street, literally, and you die. And that's what happened. You died, during the Irish potato famine, you died frozen to death, and the landlords continued to confiscate. A lot of people left during that famine, and that's one of the ways America was actually populated. My family came a little bit later in the 1880s. My great-grandfather on my mother's side came here, and on my great-grandmother also on my mother's side came here from Europe, and then on my father's side from Croatia in 1906. I had the opportunity to go back and visit my grandfather's place of birth with my oldest son, who's now 41. And that gives you some perspective, because there's nothing changed hardly at all there in 120 years. And the same place my grandfather left is still there. I mean, it's my relatives are still living there. My grandfather never made it back. And I think about when he came through Ellis Island, and I've got the entry images and all that, and he came through in 1906, but he didn't become a citizen until the 1920s, I believe, before that was finalized. And, when you think about that whole migration period and what's happened, that was before income tax. They were leaving, a rough way of being in the West, so-called West. Liberty wasn't there. Freedom wasn't there even in 1906. But going back to the founding fathers, the monarchy maintained control of the land, and the church at the time essentially kept you stupid, because they thought you needed some intermediary between you and God, which I got news flash, you don't. It's okay if that's what you want to do, but you don't need an intermediary. And so when you look at what was happening when income tax came in, it was another way to tax the labor of human beings, something that was unconstitutional, ruled by the U.S. Supreme Court in the 1890s, that income tax, taxing a human labor, was involuntary servitude. not allowed in the United States. And what we saw evolve was something that only affected not even the middle class or the lower class. The massive of the country were not affected. Only the rich at the time, and the very rich at the time, paid an income tax. And that, of course, we saw the erosion of that over time to where now corporations pay the least amount and individuals pay the most amount, taxing up to a third of your labor or more as an individual at the national level. And then at the state level, another bite, and then excise taxes and all the roll up on that, another bite, until they're probably grabbing about 80% of your productive labor. So are you free, or have we evolved into a new form of serf? In fact, most of our land has property tax at the local and state level in most communities in the country. So you don't even own your land. You have a partnership. You have a partnership with the state. And you have a partnership with the bank, because most people don't own anything anymore. You used to be able to own a homestead. You could go out, put stakes in the ground, grab the four corners, survey it, mark it off, and create a farm there and clear it. And at the end of the day, you'd own it. So you actually did own your property. Mortgage, there's no such thing as mortgage. That's a modern thing, in terms of how those evolved, in terms of average people having them. A credit as such has evolved. That's a banker's trick, happened way after income taxes. Easy credit, installment credit, none of that. That evolved in this last century, like less than 100 years ago even. But these are systems to recreate the slave state, right? I mean, really, you think about it. And then to limit your privacy by attacking you digitally, which is what's happened. The kick in your digital doorway has happened. And that's where now, because digital information is the domain of commerce, nobody wants to interfere. It's not the domain of commerce anymore. It's the domain of privacy. It belongs to us individually. Should not be used or exploited in any way, collected for sales, political, or any other reason. It ought to be deleted. Boop, delete, not related to you at all in any way, shape, or form, and illegal to do so on every level. We need to rethink this digital world that we've created, because in fact it is the foundation of freedom today and speech today, and the very essence of who we are as liberated in the old sense, liberated people. That's what it used to mean. Liberated, free of restriction and undue regulation and undue intrusion by government into our lives. It used to fit 2 volumes. You could carry the entire law library under your arm, and now it fills up 3 or 4 floors of a big building, and nobody knows what the law says or what the regulations mean. It's just a big hijacking of the republic, one slice at a time, until the baloney's all gone. And now we need to call it like it is. We need to demand that this president do what he did, what he said, and what he has started doing like no other has ever done. Disrupt it. Shake the core of the status quo that has failed us, that has failed the nation and failed our values. No matter what political party or persuasion we come from, we are being robbed of our democracy and robbed of this republic. And we've been talking about really the fundamental rights in the context of the technocracy, something that I started reporting on now 25 years ago as I saw it kind of evolving and what it was going to do. And when I go back even to my teens, my late teens, I was talking to a lot of people about what I saw then. This would have been the 1970s. And what I was seeing then was this whole concept that transportation, information, and communication systems at that time were going to be the big revolutionary trendsetters in terms of technology. And if you think about it, after that is where we got Federal Express, UPS, the whole idea of the spoke and hub idea of shipping and express shipping got evolved. Literally, Alaska has shipping hubs for FedEx and UPS for their international shipping. If you look on a globe, which makes sense, you'll see why, because of where we sit relative to Europe, Asia, and the North and South America. Easy to transit this hub for the entire Northern Hemisphere for sure. So when you think about kind of technology, and then you look at communications, obviously now we can make calls anywhere in the U.S. for virtually nothing. It's all hooked into our cell phones. Internationally, we can use Skype or WhatsApp or any number of things that'll get us around the world. Basically nothing, free communication on a level that's never been Unbelievable. I mean, my grandfather, again, talking multi-generational memory, was here when radio was invented, okay? I mean, he was a kid when radio was invented. Phones weren't in standard use. They were kind of a unique thing when he was born in 1890. But you think of the whole evolution of transportation, communication, information systems, stuff I was talking about, and you look at the next 50 years from the 70s to where we are and where we're headed, unbelievable difference. So when you think about technology, technology doubles from where we are today, from the invention of the wheel to where we are today. That span of human inventiveness will double in 6 to 9 months, and does that every 6 to 9 months. Because now you have all these technologies feeding on one another, and everything is accelerated. And when you dump quantum computing on this, which is coming, and AI, which is coming, which is again going to reshape the whole discussion of what liberty, freedom, and within a democratic republic is going to look like. This generation right now, those that remember the values and those that know the technology, the young and the old, which is why now more than ever, the recognition of multi-generational knowledge needs to be expressed and shared between grandparents and grandchildren. You know, we need to get the gap filled. A lot of grandparents are retired, share strong values, have an opportunity to reach out, communicate with your grandchildren through the vehicles that exist today. Use these tools, Skype, internet, whatever you can if you can't be with them in present. Be with them, share the values, pass them on, because this is the way the next generation will be shaped. It's either going to be on the backdrop of that. Think about what's happened within the household, within the family, again, an erosion within a republic. When you have no one training kids, the state is, or daycare center is, it's giving them their agenda, not your agenda. Grandparents who have time can engage their grandchildren in ways that parents can't. Take them for the summer on a trip for a month. Go do something with your grandkids where you have a chance to get close to them and influence them with your stories, your narrative, your thinking, your experiences, and pass them on in a context of values. Kids love it, man, and we don't do it enough, and it's something the kids are crying for. That kind of outreach. Turn the electronics off. I know they'll fight like crazy as they go through the electronic withdrawals, because it is. Because what's happening with the electronics, they get releases of biochemicals within the brain that excite them, that stimulate them. The same centers of the brain that are attached to orgasm, drug addiction, alcoholism. You know, these things that create the reoccurring habits that are irresistible is what's being imposed on children today. So extracting them, and then you do the programming. Take over as chief programmer. That's what I joked about it with my youngest, who's 12. I'm her chief programmer, because what I say matters to her. What you say to your children matters to them. The values you convey, and these fundamental values should be delivered in a way where they get the depth of the understanding and the heart of it. The heart of what it means to be an American is only going to be conveyed by you. Because the institutions of education from K through 12 are not doing it anymore. They're doing the opposite. They're giving a squishy socialistic collectivism for the new 21st century slave. This is not what we are about. When you think about basic freedoms, even the Bill of Rights isn't even taught in school. You know, I mean, it's like the last course in a high school program is government class first semester. What do you learn by then? Nothing. In a semester, you should be knowing about government from K through 12 every year, something that teaches you not just about a bunch of historical footnotes, but how do you engage your government? How do you participate in government? What does it mean to have free speech? What does it mean to have freedom of the press? What are the Bill of Rights, and should we be able to articulate them as children? And the answer is yes, we should. Foundationally, from elementary school, middle school, high school, not on the last semester of high school to fill out some check the box. No, it's foundational to who we are. That box should have been checked long before your last year of high school, and you ought to be participating by then. If you're 18 years old, in your precinct caucuses and your district caucuses if you're in a political party. And so you can take over your political party if you're listening to this broadcast. You know, that's how simple as it is. If you show up to your precinct caucuses, nobody does, Democrats or Republicans, or libertarians for that matter, show up, find out where they're at, and then show up for the district caucuses after. And if you show up in mass, you take over. And in mass, like on the district level, might be 10 people, you know, and I've seen even less that can take over a district precinct caucus, find out when their elections are, and then crash the party and organize it. You can do these things. You know, the moral majority did that back in the 80s, you know, and they organized at the precinct level and the district level, and they took over the Republican Party and held it for quite a while. I don't believe in religious control of political parties even more any more than I believe in a monarchy controlling them. But the idea that individuals can control them with similar political values, I think, is the whole point of it, isn't it? And if they don't represent your values, then either get out of those parties or take over. You know, I mean, it's one of the two. Don't stay and talk about how crummy they are. Either take over or get out. Or, you know, and Trump took over. He beat everybody and changed the Republican Party into the party of what it is today, which is, you know, way different than what the globalists had in mind when they took control of it and what they have in mind owning the Democrats still. And they're doing everything they can to strip you of your freedom and your speech, most importantly. 2 years out front of the next election, Donald Trump, get on board, man, reclaim the public space. We want to have our discussion. Whether you're running or not, at least defend our right to have that discussion now and in the future by coming down on these big tech companies, breaking up the monopoly power that they control and changing the course of history. You know, this hour I haven't plugged, and I need to plug a little bit for the network. And I want to encourage people to go to the info store. Infostores.com supports this network. I volunteer my time when I come on. So I'm not on the payroll here or anything like that because I believe in what we're doing. I believe in the education that we're providing. And it's important. 3 or 4 times a year, I come down for a week and do some more intense stuff with the guys here because I believe in the network and what we're accomplishing, but we need your support. Infowarsstore.com. We always have specials going, but the products are the best. Infowarsstore.com. My books and videos are there. Supplements are all there. Go there and support the network. That takes care of the guys that allow this production to happen. And there's a great crew behind those of us that have a face on the screen or a voice on the airwaves that make this all work. And we appreciate when you support the InfoWars and the war we're in, because it really is about information. You know, when we've been going through the show today talking about the basic fundamental rights that are being stripped away by the technocracy, by those that would attack our freedoms, strip us of our liberties, and take away our guns so we can never get them back. Now is the time. This is the call. You're the tip of the spear. And this is Dr. Nick Begish in this 4th hour on a Friday afternoon in my part of the world. And we'll be back next Friday. Thank you for being here. Have a great weekend. Remember your mother. It's Mother's Day. Remember your liberties and take one so we can act. Now time. This is the call. You're the tip of the spear. And this is Dr. Nick Begish in this 4th hour on a Friday afternoon in my part of the world. And we'll be back next Friday. Thank you for being